Today we have the honor to speak with Jeremy Schwartz, one of the biggest authorities on leadership. He was a CEO of multinational corporations like The Body Shop, Pandora, and Carnival PLC, managing director at L'Oreal, as well as marketing director for Sainsbury's and Coca-Cola, where he actually invented the Coke Zero brand. He's now chairman of the Kantar WPP Sustainability and Diversity Practice and advisor to McKinsey's. What will it take a company to succeed in the 21st century world as we are witnessing? How to embrace challenges and make most of them? How to get the theory into practice? Mr. Schwartz, welcome and thanks so much for your time.
Great, well, nice to speak to you. Looking forward to it.
In broad strokes, the following secular trends seem to be running the world. Technology, eating basically everything. Demographic trends, environmental challenges, and social and wealth distribution issues that the incumbent economic paradigm does not seem to be able to solve. What is your take on this?
Well, I think you've chosen good ones. I might just add a couple more or give some color to them. So I think on technology, clearly that is, but I would actually put a subset of data, because both in a good way, which is understanding what's happening in our world, and a bad way, which is the way governments may be using it to control certain countries. I think another one that's important to bring it is what I would call the empowered consumer, which is that over the last, well, since 2008, and it is a date, literally, because that was the date that the iPhone was invented. And suddenly we were freeing up people from around the world to be just accept broadcast news from certain companies. We've now got people who are completely in control of what they buy, what they do, what they choose in a way we've never seen before. And you know, that means that the word loyalty is very, very difficult. It means that disruptors can use the technology to speak to these empowered consumers like never before. And so I think that's, you know, a crucial element to put in your mix. I think one other thing to put in there is the changing landscape of the superpowers. We cannot underestimate, in my view, what China can be, what China is, and what China can be, and what China may do, and the tensions between America, China, Russia, and Europe, let's say, and where those evolve. I think those need to be considered, and the pandemic showed us that people are now considering moving manufacturing back to countries. Well, that's not a small impact that we're going to see the results of over the years.
All policies, at least in the developed world, seem to be geared towards digitalization and ESG principles. And these are probably not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
What would be the most appropriate response of any company manager to these trends, in your view?
I think the first and most important one is to be having an innovation and breakthrough mindset, because both of those very big trends, and artificial intelligence I would put within data and just bring that one out as well, are going to require companies to change what they do today to survive into the future. Business as usual won't be sufficient. And when you're a manager and you're worried about the next quarter or the next year, frankly, to think about 2 years away or some future problem is easy to ignore. I think the great managers and leaders will run two things in parallel, and they will run business as usual, but at the same time, they will run a program to anticipate the future and to build solutions for their business that can be ready. And I think any thoughts that you might be able to escape the problems by just ignoring them will, I think, be caught out by governments who will regulate to force change. And we could argue that they've not been brave enough to do it yet, so why are they ever going to do it? And that's a good question. One thing that is changing their bravery is they need money like not before because of COVID. And I think they're going to be motivated to find ways to get money from companies by putting regulation that, for example, finds the use creating of waste or finds ways to charge for emissions in a way that they might not have been that bold in the past. So those are the things I would be doing.
Let's dive into practical aspects on what will it take for a company to succeed in the decades to come. Is there even a kind of a to-do list to be followed by managers?
Absolutely, there is a to-do list. There are some in terms of preparing the business and some in the way that the business operates. So I'll give you a couple.
Okay.
And I think the first one is every manager, every leader has a personal obligation, and I'm going to repeat that word, a personal obligation to understand and learn about both digital and sustainability. This is not something you can either say you'll leave to other managers, or it's not your problem, or it's too complicated, therefore I'm just not going to bother, or I'm too old to learn. If you do that, that's dangerous. So the first thing is to get learning and learn every day. The second thing is that we've had, let's say, 50 years of a particular way of doing leadership. It's a sort of command and control, do what I tell you to do, we'll do everything, we'll repeat everything very accurately at the lowest cost, and consistency and quality has been important. Two new skills that are brand new ones that are coming from the technology industry but need to be learned. The first one is about agility. Speed is a source of competitive advantage. Being able to mobilize yourself and your teams to work quicker to solve a problem than you've ever done before, and that's what the word agile means, very light-footed, very fast, very nimble, is a technique managers and companies need to learn. And then the other one is what I call everyone's a leader now. Let me explain what that means. Again, historically, the whole structure of industry worldwide has been built around a boss and then people doing what they're told. And that works very well when you're in a factory or you need just something repeated. But now we have not only empowered consumers, but empowered employees. And many of them want to have responsibility, they want to be able to take impact, and they can really contribute. So I think the other important management element is being able to trust and empower your employees to step up and contribute in a far more added value way than you might have expected, and to trust them more. And in some ways, the whole COVID issue of having people working at home has forced us to trust our employees that they are working when they're out of sight. And I think that's going to continue as a theme to build on.
And this probably applies to a company of any size, right?
Absolutely, it does. When you're a small entrepreneur and you only have a few employees, there's a real temptation to gain control or to go at your own speed, to not listen to other people, how better things could be done. And yet the ability to listen to either new employees or to listen to some of the, hopefully you've got some good employees, is important. And to be able to go fast, because other competitors will go fast. The Chinese go at a different speed to the West. I can tell you, when you work with the Chinese, they just love speed. So a small company, but then a very big company has to learn not to be just big and slow and cumbersome, but then act like the small entrepreneur, because if they don't, those same entrepreneurs are using technology to attack big companies. So yes, in both instances.
How do you tackle the resistance to change? Because if you have to go through the whole company to motivate everyone to become a leader of some sort, there's sure going to be people who wouldn't like that.
Well, I think I'm very pleased you've asked that question. It's probably the most important question we need to be asking ourselves all the time. So let me break it down into two components. Actually, quite often the biggest resistors of change are the middle managers. And I don't know if you use that same term, but assuming you do.
Okay.
And every time that I say this expression to somebody, they will always say, oh yes, you're absolutely right, Jeremy, it's the middle managers who block change. And there's 3 or 4 reasons why they do it. Number one, the word manager implies controlling a group of people below you and doing something in a repeated, consistent way. The second thing is quite often they've reached a position in life, possibly where they've got a mortgage and they've got a family, and they don't want to take any risks. They have another agenda, their personal agenda, and that's about self-preservation, i.e. don't do anything that will make me lose my job. So I think there are two ways to overcome it. The first one is actually to call middle managers middle leaders. We should actually be changing the name middle managers to middle leaders, because a leader is somebody who has to do two things. They have to do that delivery day in, day out and hit all the targets, but they also have got to think about the future and take the employees to the future. And I think, and I believe, and I've done this now, when you say to a middle manager or middle leader, it gives them permission to act differently, to be bolder, to be visionary, to step out of their comfort zone and to consider embracing change. Now, then, if you really want to deal with the fear, you've then got to reassure people around bonuses and income and job security, and that you're not going to be fired for doing a change and perhaps getting it wrong. And I think that's about creating a culture and a bonus structure that rewards people doing things differently, as opposed to rewards them doing more of the same.
How to set priorities? First go digital and then green, or vice versa, all fronts at the same time? How can a company, if it is an SME, doesn't have the resources that the big companies have, how would they approach these dilemmas best, in your view?
So I could almost say if they haven't gone digital already, they've already got a major problem. But there are many companies, and in the UK, for example, last year, a whole number of retailers went bust, closed, because their leaders didn't believe in digital. They didn't believe in e-commerce. They thought it wasn't for them. Well, they're now closed, and these were big companies. So I would hope that everybody listening to this video in their company has gone digital, but I'm very pleased that you still raise that, because a big mistake that we all can make is to think that once we've got let's say a website or an e-com, or we've started to go digital, the job is done. And the mistake is it's never done, because continually technology is changing on a daily basis. And I'll give you an example of that. Well, let me give you the example. The example is when I speak to some of the digital agencies, every Friday, they have to retrain their whole company, because Facebook and Google are launching new products so quickly, so frequently, that the only way to keep up is to retrain the company every Friday on what's the latest product. So that's a sort of speed of change. So I would actually focus first as a priority on digital, because that's an immediate requirement. It's an immediate area of change. And if you're not doing it, you're in trouble. And if you are doing it, you've got to do it better every day. And then in parallel, to look at being green. I think what I tell companies is, when they think about how might I consider embracing sustainability, what do I have to do? I recommend looking at what they've done in digital, because it's pretty similar. Digital was a complete disruptive transformation that required us to bring in new types of people, put new processes, put money in different places, to invent new skills, to invent new products. It's exactly the same with sustainability. You need new types of people, new types of investment, new types of ways of doing the business, new types of system, new types of reporting. And a quick way to just get your head around it is to say, well, what all the things we did in digital, let's try and reproduce that for our sustainability initiatives, obviously from a different focus, and you'll probably do quite well as a starting.
How to start digitizing your business if you're not there already? Is it best through a kind of a loyalty program, and how expensive is it to implement this? Is it realistic to be applicable to just about every company?
Well, again, that's a very big question, in the sense that depending on your industry, depending on your area, depending on your clients, the solutions will have differences. But I would hope that everybody has got a website, whatever their business, because at least that's an access point to who you are. And then if you're in the trading area, to consider having an e-com business. And, there is a complexity to that, because suddenly you're in the direct distribution and you're suddenly having to manage inventory and pricing and consumer complaints. So I think if you're in any business plus or minus, where you have something that you're selling to an end consumer, you definitely should have a website and you should be trading. And what we see, for example, I've been doing some work in the hotel business, and we see a company like Booking.com, which I'm sure you know.
Of course.
And one thinks, well, surely that must be the beautiful solution for every hotel. Actually, every hotel is trying to get off Booking.com because they charge 18% margin, and trying to get customers, or particularly bigger hotel chains, directly to their websites to save that money. So, you know, even if you've got something like Amazon or you've got eBay or something, to have a website yourself and build up that business, you know, gives you data. That's the key thing. It gives you the data on the consumer and the ability to control how your products are presented and sold. And therefore, I would be building that skill. But you will then need experts come in and help you, and resources. But hopefully it'll be incremental and give you incremental income that justifies the investment.
What is a minimum requirement in terms of dedicated staff to do that? Do companies without strong HR management even stand a chance?
Yes, I mean, yes, you definitely can. So again, it's a big question, but let me give you an example about myself. You know, here I am talking to you. Because I have a speaking business and a consulting business, and my consulting business helps managers and leaders and founders. I coach them on how to create what I call extraordinary goals. How do you set something that's a breakthrough, and then how do you actually do it? And in both those instances, you know, I have websites, I have LinkedIn marketing campaigns, I have Instagram, I have you know, Google advertising, and all of that I do with people that I've outsourced to. So one of the things about digital, for example, is there are lots and lots of agencies. Sometimes it's hard to know the good ones from the bad ones, because there are bad ones, but there are lots of agencies that can get you going. And then once you've got scale, or once you've got, you feel you have enough money, you can then you do it in-house. But the key thing is to be very careful, or quite careful, about who you use, because many people claim to do a good job, and I hear many stories of people frustrated by their agencies not being as good as they said.
Yeah, this is just what I wanted to ask you, is what aspects to outsource or get into partnerships for in order to get the job done, yeah.
Yeah, you see, I think what you've got to look at, because again, it all depends on the size of the company and the money. You know, there comes a point when, in order to be very agile and reactive to the consumer, it is better to employ the people, because they can be looking at it every day, and it can be cheaper to actually employ them than to use an agency who uses a margin and all the rest. Obviously, one advantage of using an agency is because they're dealing with lots of different clients, they're getting lots of different experiences, and they can employ the best talent because they can pay them more or use them across lots of different businesses. So, you know, perhaps I sometimes see to have a blend of your own people plus agencies to get the best of both, you know, is a winning strategy. And of course, if you're a very big company, you can employ lots of internal people, but even then, there's a value to having agencies to provoke you, to bring you new thinking, and to make sure you're not falling behind the competition.
You have listed 8 new skills of leadership in order for a manager to unlock extraordinary goals. Can we go briefly through them?
Yes, well, I can just pick a couple, because I don't know if they want to hear all 8, but I think the premise is this, and I know I've now mentioned it a couple of times, but really, actually, the whole concept of leadership from a business point of view came out of the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. And one of the very strong elements of management was a concept called Taylorism, which was to use a stopwatch to measure how long it took everybody to do a piece of work, and to drive productivity by really making humans like robots. And that's why I keep using this word command and control, and sort of leaders and managers, because all of the management that we've used for the last, you know, in most companies comes from those very simple ideas, and not much has changed and not much has been challenged. The boss thinks he's the boss. He thinks everybody should do, or she, what they say, and everybody falls in line. But where we can see that that isn't the perfect answer is when we look at the 5 most valuable companies in the world, which 10 years ago were not even in the top 10, which are, you know, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, and Google, and those companies use different management techniques. So one of them is extraordinary goals, and let me give you the example of what that is. You know, imagine if you were running Google and you said, let's go and take a photograph of every single road in the world, sorry. And you would say, but that's a crazy idea. You know, we can't take a photograph of every road in the world. There are millions and millions. Well, Google has done Street View, and they have photographed every single road in the world. And then they created Google Maps where they photograph the world because they set an extraordinary goal. And when we think about Amazon, the idea of delivering to your home within an hour or within the day or just next day, again, seems impossible, but they've made it happen because they set that. So I think one of the first ability, which, you know, lots of leaders have had over many years, but I don't think we talk about enough, is how to set an extraordinary goal. The next one is around purpose. It's a word that you might have heard, but again, this isn't a word to be used lightly or to be just created lightly. To create a purpose is to have an idea for your company that's more than just selling a product. It's how does it impact all the people that it touches. And again, I'll give you an example of one of the best purposes I know, which is actually NASA's purpose, which is only 3 words, which is to explore the heavens. And in just 3 words, it mobilizes everything from Hubble telescope to going to the moon, to going to Mars, to going to Neptune, because every one of those is about exploring the heavens. So if you can have a great purpose, it can mobilize you to think bigger than you might have thought. A couple of others, obviously, is I have a line called digitize or die. So we've been talking a lot about digitization. My real feeling, and I've given you an example of a big retailer in the UK that's closed down, if you don't digitize, you will die at some stage. You might last a long time, but if you're in a certain competitive industry, you will die quite soon. Sustainability is another big one. That wasn't even talked about a few years ago. You will see that any public company that hasn't got a very visible, very profound sustainability program will be attacked by investors, will be attacked by NGOs. So you better be on that. And then a couple more is around that, that everyone should be a leader, that idea of empowering the middle managers to be leaders and stepping up. And then 2 more. One is around smashing averages. Now, this is about data. So, you know, we like KPIs and they're very good because they simplify and allow us to measure things in a simple way. But KPIs are also very dangerous because they oversimplify very complex data. And what this data technology explosion has given us is great granularity. And what we see with Facebook and Google, these great companies, they're operating at microscopic data to really work out how to target individuals. And you need, as a manager now, to be into the detail, into the granular, not looking at the superficial, because that's not how people operate. So those are a few of the ones. And I think one last one just to share is about trusting employees with knowing the profitability of your business and of their function. You know, lots of companies believe and managers believe in secrecy. They sort of feel that they can't trust their employees, and if they tell them too much, they'll somehow either they're not clever enough or they'll abuse it. My experience is that when you now entrust employees with the profitability of their job, they understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they take responsibility for not just doing the job, but actually contributing to the profitability of the company. So I think there's only 1 or 2 things that a company needs to keep secret from its employees, and it should be comfortable to trust them, because with trusted information, they'll contribute more.
What does the fact that the world has been turning from globalization to localization at an increasing rate mean for corporations and their business models?
I think we should be cautious that we think it's an either or. It's what I would call and both. So I think companies need and will be and will remain both global and local. The question is which bits really work globally and which bits should be local. And by the way, this isn't so new, in fact. It is the tension that particularly multinationals have been grappling with all the time. And it's rather like a pendulum. For a whole bunch of years, you go global and standardize everything. And then you suddenly realize that you're not responding to local consumers or local cultures or local needs. So suddenly you go local And then you realize your costs are going up and it's all becoming fragmented and everybody's doing their own thing. And you suddenly say, oh, we can't do this anymore. But right now, I think the elements that we can see is that, you know, in the research that I do, for example, on food, at least people say that they really want to buy food in a restaurant, for example, that has got a local story and a local sourcing. Now, I think there's a gap between what people say and what they really will pay for or what they really, really care about. But there is a movement, I think, to saying it's crazy that we buy prawns from Chile or, you know, certain foods from China or from Africa necessarily, when we could be supporting our local areas, but only if you tell the consumer that. I think the other thing we've also realized is that, you know, a dependence on China, in my humble view, you know, can mean that perhaps in the future, you know, you will be overly dependent on them. And that can be for other countries too. It could be for Vietnam, it could be for Germany, it could be for America. But just to understand that your whole supply chain is then very dependent on other countries, and things may happen and suddenly you don't have supplies. So to have a backup locally, or perhaps to see that it's not so expensive to be local because actually you get consistency and quality or something, you know, needs to be considered. But cost will be a component of the decisions, I can tell you that.
How much can localization strengthen your pursuit of ESG principles?
Very good question. Very, very good question. Okay, there is a trade-off. This is all about trade-offs. It's all about money and it's all about convenience. In fact, when you look at the whole world from a sustainability issue, the two biggest words that have driven most of the issues, that have driven most of the problems in the world are cheapness and convenience. Plus, let's say consumption as another dynamic. But we have been in pursuit of cheapness and convenience at all costs. And that has driven us to have plastics. It's driven us to move production to, let's say, China or India, or it's driven us to pursue things that make our life easier or cheaper. So if we therefore say, but that's not sustainable, then we have to consider the implications. So let me give you a concrete example. I've been speaking to a lot of companies who grow fresh food. Now, we've got used to having every piece of food we want every day of the year, even if it's out of season. Well, that's because we want convenience, and we've been able to buy it from countries that are very cheap and be able to ship it in cheap enough that it's been worth it and we've been willing to pay. If we then say, well, no, really, we should only be eating the things that are grown locally, and that will save huge amounts of fuel, it will save water, it will save packaging, then we can reduce the impact on the planet, but we will probably lose some convenience and choice and cost. But, and you might say, God, well, nobody's going to accept that. But I don't know if in Slovenia as well, I'm sure it is, that plastic bags have been stopped in supermarkets. I don't know if that's happened with you as well. Yeah. But that's very interesting because, you know, there a piece of regulation came and said, we are going to ban plastic bags. Is it the most important thing in the world? No. But that decision's been made. And that was a plastic bag was very convenient and very cheap. What we've all learned to do is bring another bag, which isn't very convenient, and it might have even cost us a bit more, which isn't very cheap. But we've learned to adapt and we've worked out how to do it, and it hasn't hurt us so much. And we're going to have more of those situations coming where things that we were used to being very convenient, very cheap, won't be so convenient and cheap in the future. It's sort of like going back to the old days in many instances. So I think that's one way to think about it. And, you know, I know Slovenia well. I worked, actually, I went to Slovenia in probably 1975 as a kid to Lake Bled, if you know that. As a
yeah, sure.
Young, probably 11-year-old. And then I worked for Coca-Cola and was there in 1997, overseeing Slovenia. And so I know you're a country that's close to your country, close to culture, close to your history. And you've preserved a lot of it, to be honest, I would say. So it may not be such a shock, but that's the sorts of trade-offs that people will have to make.
Briefly going back to the problem of the averages, can you give me an applicable example?
I shall give you the example of Coke Zero. So I was looking, I was in charge of marketing and R&D, or marketing R&D for Europe. And I was looking at the consumption of Coca-Cola per cans per person per day. Cans of Coca-Cola per person per day as an average. And I had a nice number. And I thought, hang on, I'm just going to look at it by age group. So now I was looking at it by, by child, by teenager, by adult, by retired person. And then I thought, I wonder if I look at it by young men or men by age group. So I looked at it by men. And what I noticed is in Europe, when young men reached the age of 18, the amount they drank per day dropped quite a lot. And I thought, that's interesting. So then I looked at the same data in Mexico, in Iceland, and in America, randomly, and saw that in those countries, the amount of Coca-Cola drunk per person, per young person per day, when they reached 18, stayed at the same level. It didn't go down at all. So I asked why. And I started some research, talking to young men in Europe, why are you drinking less? I thought it might be because it's sugary, but they actually said, I use a sort of psychological analysis. They said, when I reach the age of 18, I want to be seen as a young man, not as a child. And the things in Europe that tell people I'm a young man is drinking coffee, drinking beer, drinking spirits, everything with a sort of naughty edge and perhaps even a bit of smoking. But when I look at the red can of Coca-Cola, it looks like the drink that kids drink. And I don't want to be seen as a kid. So I said, is it about it being sugary? They said, no, I love the taste. It's not that, it's just the red can. So I was thinking, I thought, well, hang on a minute. Coke is black. It's as black as coffee. It's as bad as spirits in its appearance and naughty and sort of, dark. What happens if we just made the label the same color as the black of the product? And the project was called Coke Black, was the code name. And then we made it in a slimline can, first of all, and said, right, let's test this against men. And they said, that's fantastic. That makes it look cool. And then we made the advertising for men, and a multi-billion-dollar brand was launched off simply not looking at the average numbers of drinks per person per day, but smashing the average and understanding what young men drink at each age group and looking at the data.
How did Coke Zero become such a great brand? I mean, how incremental were these stages of the development of the product and expanding it?
Well, there is something I will share with you about, which we haven't talked about, which is really, how can great businessmen, how do great businessmen create great businesses? How is Google and Apple and these companies so great? Well, I believe it comes, and I've got, 30 years of experience of that. It happens when you tap into what I call a human insight. A human insight is a truth about humanity, a truth about humans. And it can be at the level of a truth about men or young men or women or all people or Chinese or English or Slovenians or the whole world. And when you find that thing that is really meaningful and touches a nerve, you connect with people in a way that is very special and leads to very big things. So with that can of Coke, we had two insights. The first is lots of people love Coca-Cola, and I can tell you why, because when you drink it, you can't remember the taste, so you keep wanting to drink more, unlike a glass of orange that you feel you've had too much. And the black color made it feel cool and appropriate for young men. So combining those two truths meant that any man in any country in the world didn't need us to explain why a black can of Coke was relevant and exciting to them. They knew why it was because they recognized the signals we were giving them.
What is your opinion about myths in the corporate world, and how do they affect the way of doing business?
What a wonderful question, a question that I'm passionate about. Myths. Now, I have been in many businesses where, and I will give the answer of Pandora, where a myth, which is something where everybody believes something is true in a company, but when you say, who told you that, nobody can tell you. And when you say, who told you that if you don't do that, you'll be told off, nobody can tell you either. And they'll quite often say, well, the business says that, or that's what this business does. So I'll give you a myth. When I was at Pandora, it's a very simple story, but it's a nice one. I felt we needed to use celebrities if we wanted to kickstart the growth of Pandora, which was in dramatic decline. And when I spoke to all the employees, the marketing people, they said, oh no, you can't use celebrities. The board of the company has not allowed us. And I said, that's a bit of a strange thing for a board to do. Well, I'll go and speak to the board. So, I met the board and I said, okay, board, I've been told by the company or the employees in marketing that you have told them that they can't use celebrities. Well, the board said, well, none of us have said that. What a ridiculous thing. We wouldn't say that. So I then went to America and said, by the way, was it any of you who said that you can't use celebrities? And they said, no, we don't know who said that. Well, we discovered that nobody that anybody could say had said they couldn't use celebrities. And so the next day we engaged a celebrity, Millie Bobby Brown, and that propelled the brand back into growth. So there's an example. And there are lots of myths which drive fear. So we come back to the story of fear. Much fear in companies is driven because there's mythology about what you can do, what you can't do, or even worse, what the boss will say or not say. Many times you hear people say, well, we can't do that because the boss will be angry. I mean, what a terrible thing to say you won't do something in case the boss is angry. Well, either the boss may be stupid because they don't want to hear the truth, or perhaps they are angry because they've heard it many times, but you don't want that to be a sort of myth if you want to think about disruptive new ideas, because one of those employees may know something really important to help the company.
You've shared your experiences from Coca-Cola and from Pandora. Are there any interesting ones from another huge brand that you led, The Body Shop?
Okay, well, I'm going to give you a myth about sustainability, I think, because I think this is an important one. And, a shocking one and one to reflect on deeply, because it applies to many, many companies. So when I was at The Body Shop, which was obviously famous for being 40 years ahead of everybody in sustainability and in social justice, the company was very proud to say that their ingredients were very carefully sourced and were fair trade and were natural and didn't test on animals. And in fact, there were 20 ingredients that were from places around the world where the community supplied the ingredients directly. But I said, okay, I'd like to look at all 690 ingredients, actually, and I'd like to know the story on every one of those. Well, first of all, we could only find the story of where the ingredient came from and that it was sustainable for 300 in the first day. And then we had to set up a project team to find where all the other ingredients came from. And in that project, we found that 20 ingredients we really, really couldn't, quote, defend. They had some story that was not aligned to our sustainability credentials, our fair trade, and so on. And that, probably or possibly if an analyst or a not very nice person found out, they could go onto social media and say some very embarrassing things. So the myth was that everything was perfect and, surely we're such a wonderful company, why would we doubt it? The reality was things weren't so good. And right now, where companies are making statements and goals around ESG and sustainability, it's easy to assume that when you're told something is good, it's good. And you need to really, really check right to the very end to see if what you think is happening. Because if you don't, you will get caught out. And that in itself is a big piece of work, but you better do it because things are never quite what they seem.
I believe Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan said that every company has an obligation to know its impact. This is probably one of the most crucial things going forward, right, in corporate sense.
It is. And one of the areas where I think it's easy to be blind to is the impact of your supply chain from when you sell the product to the consumer. Because quite often it will be other people who may be then suppliers or distributors or retailers. Now you could say that's not my problem. And in some ways you can argue that's the case. But what we're going to see is governments are going to start to make it your problem, because in the end, most waste in most of Europe is collected by governments, perhaps with a private operator, but definitely not by the person creating the rubbish. And I suspect that COVID will make governments say, how can we get money back for clearing the rubbish that we're paying for? Let's charge the manufacturer. We'll pick up the packaging, we'll check what the name is on it, and we'll charge them for that. So I would really watch out on that end-to-end cost, because the impact of rubbish is huge.
Is the blockchain expansion going to solve a lot of such problems going forward?
I'm going to say something superficial, because though I've studied blockchain, I'm still not a good enough expert. And I don't therefore want to say something that sounds very intelligent when I haven't got all the facts. I think without a doubt that from the supply chain side, it does allow you to follow at an individual item level exactly the journey it's been on. And therefore, when you're asked to give data on perhaps thousands of ingredients over thousands of days on thousands of products, and one product has been picked on because something's happened, blockchain will allow you to trace with great accuracy, where has that come from. And I'm sure there are other uses I haven't either learned about or perhaps we don't even know, but I think it will be a component of answering that question.
For the end, would you possibly share any final thoughts with our audience?
Yes, I think one of the challenges we have as leaders is the ability to realize that if we are a leader, we have two bad behaviors, which are very good, but also bad. And the very good bits is that we believe we're experts and we believe we're in charge and must control everything, and people must do what we say. That is absolutely true, because every business, every day needs to deliver high quality at the lowest price consistently. But it can also force leaders to be blind to the world that's happening around them, to be deaf to the voices of change, to not look at the actual state of the world. And when employees or competitors or somebody says, look, I want to show you how the world can be extraordinary or different or digital or sustainable, leaders can close their ears because they think they know everything, they think they're an expert, and they think they can control everything. So my advice is to look at yourself, and that time when you're about to tell somebody an order because you know everything and you must be right, to hold back and ask the person an open-ended question, which is, what do you think I should do? What do you think we should do? What advice could you give me? Or what are you doing you don't think we're listening about? And I have one little final expression I use some managers, because even then they can be frightened or they can just believe that nothing will actually change. So I use a swear word, so I warn you now, which is I ask employees, what is pissing them off about the work they have to do? And pissing them off means really, really annoying them, but they've given up worrying about it. And then I find really big things. Like I did that once to a girl in the body shop, and she said, every time I have to press save on my computer, it takes 2 minutes to save the document because it's so big. I have to sit doing nothing for 2 minutes, but I have to save it every 5 minutes because I don't want to lose all my work. Well, I said, but that's crazy. Who in this modern day has to wait 2 minutes? Well, she'd given up bothering or believing it could change because nobody would listen to her because nobody asked. So if you ask these questions, you will find ways to be more efficient, more effective, and find things you perhaps hadn't known about.
Mr. Schwartz, thanks so much for your time, and hope to see you soon. In the meantime, where can our audience continue to follow you?
Well, you've got several things. I have a podcast called Saving Tomorrow's Planet, same Instagram as well. And every week I speak to pioneering people taking action to save the planet. You can also contact me if you would like me to help you work on some extraordinary goals. Again, it's www, of course, extraordinarygoals.com. And then I have a personal website you can contact me, which is Jeremy- which is a line in the middle, Schwartz.com. So several ways you can contact me, and I'd be delighted whether you want to be a speaker on the podcast, or if you want my help, I am more than willing to help anybody around the world solve some problems together.
Great. Thank you so much, and hope to see you.
Thank you. Nice speaking to you.